Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Grace Church. My name is Aaron, and if you've been around Grace very long, you know that a few months ago, in August of 2025, my dad passed away. And tragic and horrible, but one of the mercies of God is he and I got a lot of time together. In fact, whenever he got out of the hospital after having brain surgery on his tumor to remove a tumor, he and I got to spend quite a bit of time together as I would take him to his radiation appointments, just some of them. And we would go we would go in his car, his truck, or my mom's car, and we would go to the appointments. And he would want to listen to the radio, and I was like, no, we're going to talk, because I have some things to tell you, and you have some things to tell me. And let me just tell you, God was so gracious, and it was a beautiful time. It was a beautiful time, and I am so grateful that we got it. And my dad told me things that I'd never heard and never knew and never heard before, and I wouldn't have never imagined. And one of the stories he told me was about his calling into ministry, and I didn't know. He didn't really go to church until I became senior pastor here at Grace. He told me that when he was 18 years old, around the same time I was called into ministry, he felt called into ministry. Now, his experience was very different than mine, because I was on church staff by the time I was my 19th birthday is when I joined church staff. But he hardly ever went. Never in my lifetime until I became a pastor, I said. He told me a story about how he felt called, he wanted to go into ministry, and he goes and talks to the pastor of his church, and I can't remember the guy's name, and he's long since passed, but he said, I went and talked to him, and the guy said, you know, Mike, if you're not very outgoing, and those of you that know my dad, you'd be shocked that, because I guess when he was a younger person, he lacked a lot of confidence, so he was very withdrawn. He said, "You're not very outgoing. You're not very well spoken. You don't make very good grades." He hated school. He hated school until he went back when he was in his 40s. You don't make good grades, so maybe you're not very smart. All the things, I don't think you're called into ministry. In fact, he even said, and this really hurt him, he said, Mike, if you were a little more like your brother, God could really use a guy like that. God could really use a guy like that. He said, so Mike, what I want you to do is I want you to get a job and, get married and have kids and then just, give to the church and attend church with your family and just help out around wherever you can. Maybe you can, be an usher, or you can hand out bulletins really, it really destroyed my dad. And I didn't know. This was decades after I felt this call. And I never understood why he wasn't very excited, why he, wasn't more, it wasn't that he was never unsupportive, but why he wasn't more supportive as he was for so many things in my life. And I think about this. It's a tragedy. And maybe you have been mistreated, or maybe you felt called to go do something by God, and somebody told you, no, God doesn't really want to use you because here's all these reasons. It's a tragedy, but it's understandable because we like our heroes to look a certain way. We like people that are going to do big things, God things. We like them. We try to keep people that don't look heroic from doing anything heroic. You need to look a certain way. You need to be a certain way if you're going to be doing something worthwhile or useful or greater than something that you could hope to achieve by yourself. Turn with me to Judges 3. And we're going to look at 4 judges or punishers, as maybe you remember I called them last week, that don't quite fit the mold. That are not the people that God expected, that are not the people that people expected God to call. So first, I want you to know this. If you hear nothing else, I want you to hear, because I don't want you to be like my dad and embody this message for far too long is that God uses flawed but faithful followers to fulfill his mission. Listen to me. God uses flawed, faithful followers to fulfill his mission. That includes me. That includes you. That includes all the people we're going to talk about. So a little review. First, the book of Judges. It's a prophetic book, not history, because the author's trying to send you a message. And Judges, I don't like the word judges so much. I talked about that last week. I like the word punishers because I'm a 90s person. I would say Avengers, but I don't like the Avengers. So I like punisher. It's more my speed. These people, these punishers that God raises up, are used to punish and deliver the Israelites from their enemies, from their oppression and their suffering. And this is the pattern we see with each of them. So here's some fun little, there's some cartoons that go along with this, thanks to AI. The sons of Israel. So this is what happens. The sons of Israel, they did the evil in the sight of the Lord. They forsake God. They turn to other gods. That's the evil. It's not that they start cheating on taxes or telling lies. All that stuff comes with it. The evil that they do that leads to all that other stuff is they forsake God and they turn to other gods. Number two, the Lord his anger is kindled and he gives them over, or sometimes it says he sells them into the hands of the enemy. Number three, the Israelites cry out. Number four, the Lord raises up a punisher, a deliverer, to save Israel, to save them. Number five, the land has peace for a certain number of years. And then number six, the judge dies and the whole thing starts over again. But we're even going to see, even in this cycle, this is the monotonous cycle. This is the doom loop. This is the downward spiral. But even in the midst of this, even in the midst of all the chaos that's going on, God uses faithful, flawed followers to fulfill his mission. Now, the author is going to list these four judges, 3.5 really, and they're not viewed as bad. These are the good judges. These are the good judges, or just not as bad judges. And so we see the first one. His name is Othniel. Othniel. All these names, I'm bad at pronouncing them. And he follows the model thoroughly. Look in Judges chapter 3, verse 7. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They did the evil. They forgot the Lord their God, and they served the Baals and the Asheroth. Therefore, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of Cushan Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the people of Israel served this king 8 years. But when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer, a punisher for the people of Israel, who saved them. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. The Spirit of the Lord was upon him, and he judged Israel. He went out, the judge there, he delivered Israel. He went out to war, and the Lord gave this king of Mesopotamia into his hands, and his hand prevailed over him. So the land had rest for 40 years, and then Othniel, the son of Kenaz, dies. So this is the mission. The mission is to end the Mesopotamian rule. Now, Mesopotamia is by far the biggest, most daunting nation, the most populous enemy on the list. It took up the biggest place, the biggest amount of area. They had the most people. And they were subject to the Mesopotamian king for 8 years. They were sold into the hand of their enemy by God because they did the evil. Now, the king's name, Cushan Rishathaim, means doubly wicked. So that might not have been his real name. It might have been what they called him. It might have been a play on words that you would call him if you didn't like him, because he was so evil. Now the flaw, we talked about God uses flawed but faithful followers. Othniel's flaw was slight in our eyes. In fact, it's not even a flaw at all. The flaw is that he's the younger brother. He's the younger brother in a culture that gave heavy emphasis on firstborn children. Now, as a firstborn, I think maybe we should get back to that. Now, I mean, maybe not. But this is, secondborns, thirdborn, everybody after the firstborn was much less emphasized. They were not expected to exceed what happened with the firstborn. This is a little bit of my dad's story even. That you see this that the firstborn, everything is expected, and then the second and third and fourth, all the younger brothers and sisters are not expected to do so much. But so this is his flaw. And it's not big, but it's still something. But he's faithful too. How is he faithful? Because he is the nephew of Caleb. Caleb is one of the stars. He is one of the heroes, one of the most upheld people in Israelite history. He's one of the spies that goes out and comes back and says, no, we can take the land. We can do this. He is a military star during the conquest, during the book of Joshua. But Othniel does not rely. He is faithful. He does not rely on his uncle's reputation or his family's name. He relies on the Spirit of God, it says. The Spirit of God was upon him, and he judged. He delivered Israel. That's what it means. And he lives for 40 years, and for 40 years there's peace, and then he dies because God uses flawed, faithful followers to fulfill his mission. The next story you have is Ehud. Ehud has the same pattern. They did the evil. God says God gave control of Israel to the king Eglon of Moab. And the king Eglon of Moab, he then strengthens his position by forming alliances with other nations. And they were subject to them not the 8 years that they were sold into the hands of the previous one of Mesopotamia, but these were handed over control by God for 18 years. And so it says that the people cried out, and God raises up a man named Ehud. Now it says he's left-handed. Now this is his flaw. Now, let me explain this just for a second. The phrase, it doesn't say left-handed. The phrase actually says he is restricted in his right hand. Now, he might have actually just been left-handed, but probably not. We'll see that. We'll see why in a second. But there was a really good chance that he was disabled. Maybe his right hand is drawn up. Maybe he's missing a hand. Maybe but for probably a disability. But let's be honest, right? Left-handedness, disability, what's the difference? No, I'm left-handed, so I have been told that my entire life. I'm left-handed, which is weird, and people don't always account for it. And we see that people don't account for it. With me, it's scissors. They never account for it. So when I would try to use scissors with my left hand, I never could. And I was bad at using scissors with my right hand because right-handed scissors don't work well in the left-handed person's hand. Now, you have Ehud, and he is a left-handed person, probably either missing his right hand or his right hand has some kind of deformity or it's disabled. And he is sent with the tax, or the tribute is what it's called, to the king from the people. Now, every year they had to pay this tribute Now, we would call it a tax. We wouldn't call it a tribute to our government, but is exactly what it was. It was a tax that they had to pay. But this had a double meaning, that they would say, oh, we love you, King Eglon. Look how much we love you. We gave you all this money that you made us give you. And so he takes the tribute, he takes the tax to King Eglon. But he makes himself a sword, and he hides it on his person. And then he makes up a reason to get close to the king, to King Eglon. And he says, I have a message for you alone. And then he says, in fact, it's a message from God. And so everyone leaves the room. And Eglon is very excited. We read that he is very fat. In fact, his name means calf or cow. Like he's a fatty. And he leans in to tell him the message, and he pulls out his sword, and it says he buries the sword, and it's enveloped by his fat. Now that's fat. He uses his physical flaw to his advantage. Now, why would a person get to be alone and so close to the king? Well, there's only one reason. Is because no one thought he was a threat, especially the king. He wouldn't have let someone that close to him. The guards these were professional guards, they would have never let somebody that they had perceived was a threat close to the king. I'm going to ask you a question. What limitation in your life, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, financial, what limitation in your life do you think maybe could be used as God's secret weapon to fulfill his mission? What is that? What is that limitation that God could use as a secret weapon, like he did here with Ehud's left-handedness? Now, there are lots of comedic aspects to this story. The attendants think that he is going to the bathroom. In fact, they say that, he's probably covering his feet. That's the words they use, which, when you pull down your pants, you cover your feet up. That's the polite, I need to use the lavatory. I need to cover my feet. And not just that, the attendants think he's going to the bathroom because the room, there's multiple references to it being a well-ventilated room, meaning it probably stank. And it says that they even wait an embarrassingly long time before they actually go into the room and see what's taking so long. Like, oh man. I guess if the king is constipated, you don't talk about it. All of this is very comedic. But Ehud kills him. He's on the floor. He escapes. The guards don't come in. They finally, after an embarrassingly long time, they come in and they find him dead on the floor. And they know they're under attack. Ehud goes back home, rallies the army, and they slaughter the Moabites. And it says, then there's peace in the land for 80 years. And then he dies. So he was a young man. When this happened. So he was young. He only had the use of his left hand. There's a lot of things that people would see as limitations. But God uses those things, those limitations, those flaws. Somebody might say that's a flaw. He's young. He's limited. And then he dies. Then we get one sentence about the fourth judge. Judges 3:31 says, after him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also saved Israel. Now, an ox goad is a farm implement, not a weapon of war. But that's not the biggest issue. Why do we get one sentence about him? Because this man, Shamgar, is not an Israelite. He's not. We know this because his name sounds like the kind of people that he fights against. And the way that it's structured, it's only 4 letters instead of 3-letter root, all that. That would very much indicate that Shamgar is a foreigner. That's his flaw. It's his flaw. He's a foreigner, but he is faithful to defeat the enemies that God calls him to defeat. Finally, we get to Deborah, the last of the faithful but flawed judges. Now, Deborah appears after 80 years of peace, and then Ehud dies. And it says that the Israelites were turned over to the Canaanites. These are the very people. Now, it goes from Mesopotamia to Moab to the Philistines to now the Canaanites. Now, this is insult to injury. Because these are the very people that God had promised, if you just go in there and take care of business, you'll wipe them out. They will never be a problem for you. But you just have to obey. You just have to obey. But we saw in chapter 1 and 2 and the first part of 3 that they didn't obey. And they were unable to take out the Canaanites. And in fact, the Canaanization of Israel began. And in chapter 4, verse 3, it says, their cruelty, the Canaanites' cruelty, oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. It's getting worse and worse and worse. Now, Deborah is a prophetess she's judging a court, holding court. Now, what does that mean? The people are going to her as the spiritual and religious director for Israel. Now, this is not a flaw, okay? This is not the flaw. This is a flaw for her. This is a flaw for the nation. You see, what she is doing should be done by the priesthood. She shouldn't be. Not that she couldn't. Clearly God is using her, but this is an indication. This is an indication that the priesthood that God has commissioned and told this is what you're going to do, they are not doing this. And so, Deborah steps up. She is faithful. She is the representative of God in this story. She is both the voice and the presence, we'll see in a moment. She is the voice of God and the presence of God in this story. Look in chapter 4, verse 6. She sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abedinoam, from Kadesh, Naphtali, and said to him, has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 people from Naphtali and the people of Zebulun, and I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon with the chariots and his troops, and I will give them into your hand. So he says to her, Deborah says, wait, I know something. God told me that he told you to gather up troops and to go. Why haven't you done that? Now, look what Barak says. Barak said to her in verse 8, if you will go with me, I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go. So in this, we see that Barak has been summoned by God. He is supposed to be the judge that God is calling. And yet he hasn't gone. So now Deborah acts as the voice of God. Dr. Daniel Block, who is an incredible Old Testament scholar, makes some really interesting points on this story. He says, if you look at how it goes, Barak is the initial judge. He is the person called. He's the punisher who's called to punish the Canaanites. Now, we said this last week, and you'll see it again throughout the rest of the book, that these judges don't actually judge, but what we see Deborah doing is judging. She's acting like the voice and the presence of God for the people of God. Now, some would say, and Dr. Block would put this forward, that Deborah isn't the judge. Barak should be the judge, but we're going to see in a moment that he is not given credit as the judge. Now, because Deborah says to him, didn't God tell you? Didn't God tell you to do this thing? And he's like, you got me. I'll go, but only if you go with me, because you are the voice of God and you are the presence of God, and I need that. Now, because Barak relies on a person instead of the presence of God, actually, God gives a caveat. And in chapter 4, verse 9, it says, and she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory. For the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. And then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. She said, hey, I'll go with you, because I get why you're asking me. But this lack of faith is going to cost you something. It's going to cost you. And so Dr. Block and I tend to agree that Barak is the initial punisher, but because of that request, that faith, that flawed request, he will not receive the glory for punishing the enemies. But he's still a part of it. Deborah's part of it, Barak is part of it, and then this other person we're going to see. See, everybody, when you read the story, the author is trying to make you think that Deborah's going to get the glory. And she doesn't get the glory for it either, because she's not the one that Sisera is delivered into her hands either. And so we see that Barak calls the army, Deborah goes with him, and they destroy the Canaanite army. They destroy everyone except for one person, Sisera, the leader. He escapes. And he is running for his life, and he is running, and he finds a gathering of tents that are allies. This is an ally tribe. And a woman named Jael comes out, and she greets Sisera. She knows him, and she invites him into her tent for a rest and for refreshment. And so she does what he would expect a good host to do. She comes, she puts him under a blanket. He's exhausted. He has been running and running and running for his life. He asks for something to drink, and she gives him warm milk. So what do you get when you're exhausted and you're under a snuggly blanket and you get some warm milk? That is a recipe for nighty-night time. For anybody, right? And that is, he does. He falls asleep hard. And before he goes to sleep, he says, hey, I want you to stand out at the front of your tent. And anybody says, is there a man in your tent? Just tell him no. And she waits for him to go to sleep, which doesn't take long, because he's cozy. He's got a belly full of warm milk. And she grabs a tent stake and a hammer and nails him through the temple to the floor of her tent. She kills him. Now later, Barak comes running through. He's chasing. He finally catches up. He gets to the gathering of tents, and Jael says, hey, I have the person you're looking for. Come here, and shows him, and he's still nailed to the ground. Now Barak, he doesn't get the glory for killing Sisera. But he goes on to command the army, and they eventually defeat the Canaanite king too, because Sisera is just the commander of the army. And they end up defeating the Canaanite king. But who gets the victory? Who gets the glory for the defeat? Look in chapter 5 with me, because Deborah and Barak sing a song, a little duet, a little islands in the stream, if you will. In Judges 5:24, they say, most blessed of woman be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, of the tent-dwelling women, most blessed. She gets the glory. Deborah doesn't get the glory for defeating the Canaanite army. Barak doesn't for commanding the army. It's Jael. And the land rests for 40 years. You see, this is the heartbeat of the book. A hero rises, a mission is accomplished, the hero passes, leaving this vacuum, and eventually the people will fill the vacuum with the evil. Othniel died, Ehud died, Shamgar died, Deborah dies, Barak dies, Jael died. Like, they all die. My dad, his pastor, looked at a man and saw a flaw that made him not enough. He was looking for a hero that didn't exist. A person who was perfect and permanent and powerful, all on their own. But the book of Judges tells us that God is not looking for a resume. He is looking for a faithful follower, even though they're flawed, to fulfill his mission. He doesn't need a firstborn. He just needs an Othniel who will rely on his spirit. He doesn't need a right-handed warrior that fits, some type of prototype. He can use Ehud with a restriction to strike a blow for freedom. He doesn't need a professional general. He can use Shamgar. Or he can use Jael with a farm tool or a hammer and a tent peg. The reason we can be flawed but faithful today is because a judge broke the cycle. We talked about it last week. That is Jesus. Every judge in this cycle dies, and then it just becomes worse. But we follow a deliverer, Jesus, who was flawed in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of God was absolutely perfect. You see, he was flawed. In fact, the Israelites thought he was flawed because he claimed to be greater than the temple and greater than Moses and greater, and on equal terms with the Father. The Gentiles hated him. The Romans hated him because he talked about love and he talked about peace, and the world hated him, and he was beaten and mocked. They put him up on a cross, and yet he is the only judge who died and then came back to life. You see, Jesus is a judge that doesn't give us rest for 40 years or 80 years. He gives us rest for eternity. And so with him on your side, I want to ask you, what flaw do you think disqualifies you from fulfilling the mission that God has given you? Is it your past? Well, Aaron, you don't know what I did. You don't know what I did when I was young. You don't know what I did a few days. You don't know where I spent my life. You don't know how I lived. I don't. But it doesn't matter. What is your limitation? Well, Aaron, I have this physical limitation. I have this mental limitation. I have this emotional limitation. I have all these limitations, Aaron. God uses flawed but faithful followers to fulfill his mission. So what that you lack status in the eyes of religious elites? Who cares? The God of Othniel, the God of Ehud, the God of Shamgar, the God of Deborah, the God of Barak, the God of Jael, is whispering something to you. And he is whispering something to you that the angel told a fearful Gideon that we're going to talk about next week in Judges 6:14. And the Lord turned to Gideon and said, "Go in this might of yours and do the work that I've called you. Save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you? Go in this might of yours." That isn't really yours at all. Go in this might. Go in the presence of God. You are enough. Not because of your resume, not because of your glowing past, not because of your physical, emotional, mental acumen. You are enough because of whose Spirit is upon you. So in 2026, stop waiting to be perfect. Stop waiting to be perfect and start being useful. Start being useful. God has a mission for you. And he uses flawed, faithful followers to fulfill that mission. And he wants to use you. Let's pray. God, thank you for your example in the book of Judges. Father, help us to not strive to be something we can't, but Father, help us to be useful to you. Help us be the best, flawed, faithful followers we can be, Lord, and use us to fulfill that mission. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I love you guys. We'll see you next week.